viewers of teleSUR English in Quito, Ecuador. This is From the South, and I'm Camila Escalante. We begin in Ecuador, where President Lenín Moreno has returned to Quito, and a massive march by indigenous people and other organizations has been heavily repressed in the city's historic center. Tens of thousands of demonstrators made their way peacefully through the historic center as Ecuador held a national strike against the government's austerity measures. This is the 7th day of protests against the economic package, which is part of the President Lenín Moreno's deal with the International Monetary Fund. During the last 2 days, indigenous marchers have converged on the capital from the north and from the south. They've been joined by students, social movements, and ordinary citizens angry at the fuel price rises and cuts in workers' rights. As the march moved close to the presidential palace, they were met with tear gas, dispersed by police, and for the first time since demonstrations began, water cannons were used. Some of the protesters responded with stones. On Tuesday, the government imposed an overnight curfew prohibiting people from being in the vicinity of government buildings. According to authorities, some 700 people or more have been detained so far up until yesterday, and there are reports that at least 2 people have died. And leaders of the main indigenous movement, CONAI, have flatly rejected remarks by Ecuador's vice president about possible negotiations. On social media, they said it was untrue that CONAI leaders were in talks with the government at the United Nations office in Ecuador. We are with our members in the streets of the historic center, they said. Our correspondent, Estefania Bravo, is in the historic center in Quito with the latest update on the situation.
Hello, we are here in the capital Quito in the city center. It is approximately 3:57 p.m. and as you can see, we are here with various social movements that have come together to the center of Quito to protest against the economic measures of President Lenín Moreno. It is almost 4 p.m. in the afternoon, and people here, I have talked to various people here, and they have told me and they have talked to me and said that this march is not pro any political party. It is against President Lenín Moreno and the economic measures. What we are about to see is the people that are protesting that have taken the streets. The police has repressed violently against these people, and yes, right now we are in the top of a bridge, so we can see the streets very clearly. We are in the center of Quito, and we are expecting to see what will happen in the coming hours. We also know that there's a curfew that starts at 8 p.m. local time. So at 8 p.m. local time, people marching, people that are on the streets, will be taken out by the police. The curfew starts at 8 p.m. and it remains until 5 a.m. So we will continue to update you with any information that we get.
Another producer here on the ground, Esteban Carrillo, is holed up with a number of protesters after they were attacked by police during demonstrations.
We were peacefully marching when police officers started attacking us. They didn't care that there were women and children present at the march. They threw tear gas canisters at us. We tried to run away, but several of us tripped and got injured. They didn't have any respect for anyone. Those of us who are here today are not receiving money to be a part of this protest. We are here because we are demanding President Moreno's resignation. We want him to leave power.
We came here to peacefully protest against this corrupt government, and police officers ambushed us and attacked us from many directions. They didn't care about the fact that there were many women present at the march. We need help. People around the world need to understand what we are demanding. We demand this government leave power. All of these people who are marching and protesting demand the resignation of the president who has violated our rights.
One of the demonstrators explained to teleSUR why this wave of protests has grown so strong.
These decisions from the government will have over the life of the families, of the working class families, the peasantry, and the middle class also. These are decisions, there are conditions that the FMI put to the Ecuadorian government, thinking only in the benefit of a small part of Ecuadorian society. And the government didn't even make like complementary measures or any technical studies about how to support the crisis that this is gonna create in the common people. This is the first reason, like a reaction to the economic impact over life among the common people. And the second is that all that we have known until now, that the meaning of democracy has been destroyed, is in a very deep crisis, and Ecuadorian people love, understand democratic politics. They have participated since the 19th century in the building of a democracy.
Another protest against the economic package has also taken place in Ecuador's second city of Guayaquil. The police fired tear gas at this peaceful march as well. President Lenin Moreno moved the government to Guayaquil as the indigenous marches approached the capital, but indigenous communities from the coastal region have also arrived in Guayaquil to join protests with local social movements. Even though President Moreno returned to Quito, marches continue in Guayaquil. Our correspondent Carla Gonzalez is there with the latest.
The protests continue in downtown Guayaquil. They haven't taken other roads because today both marches against and in favor of the national strike have been going on here in 9 de Octubre Avenue. But for the indigenous march, which is also gathered by campesinos, by students, by artists, they have been met with police repression. We've seen dogs, motorcycles, horses, and a lot of repression by the police for, of course, rounds of tear gas that have also been thrown at protesters. They have not allowed them to enter the main street, the main avenue of the city. Meanwhile, we see on the back that we have the march that was called by the mayor, Cynthia Viteri. The municipal workers are here. They are rejecting what they say is a threat against Guayaquil, because they say that if the indigenous march enters the city, it will create chaos, which coincidentally, the march has entered the city, not in a large number as it did in Quito, but it has entered the city of Guayaquil. And now we are seeing how this march had complete avenues that were open. There wasn't any repression for their part. They were able to walk. There were no tear gas on this side of the road, but on the other one where the indigenous march is happening, they have been met with strong force by police.
Thank you, Carla. And protesters in the Amazonian province of Napo have elected their own indigenous governor. Indigenous organizations and other social movements took over the governor's office in the provincial capital of Tena. They said they were sacking the current governor as a Moreno traitor and held a community assembly to elect a new governor. He is Patricio Chiguango, the president of the Indigenous Federation of Napo. Ecuadorians in the United States have also been protesting against the International Monetary Fund pushed austerity measures. A number of Ecuadorians entered the office of the IMF Special Representative to the United Nations in New York in order to reject their government's deal with the organization, which will disproportionately affect the working class. Carrying banners and the indigenous plurinational flag, the protesters called for the IMF to take its hands off Ecuador. Earlier, I spoke with Canada-based writer with Ecuadorian roots, Joe Emersberger, who weighed in on the mainstream media coverage of Ecuador's protests.
Well, it's very obvious. I mean, you know, right away, you know, we see articles referring to the protesters as rioters. You know, when protesters take to the streets in Venezuela or something like that, they're never called rioters. No matter what, even if they do things like burn people in the streets, they're not called rioters. And also, you know, Luis Almagro just put out a statement. Finally, you know, it took him a while because they don't really want to say anything, but he put out a statement and he said, and he basically didn't say anything about police repression at all. In fact, the only thing he very clearly condemned was any violence or vandalism by protesters. And I mean, that's 180 degrees the opposite of what they do when there's protests in Venezuela or you know, or if there were any protests when Correa was in office, you know. So it's completely different. Human Rights Watch they're quick to jump on anything that Correa did and accuse them of being repressive. I haven't seen anything from them. I've looked, and they've just kept totally quiet, because they were very big cheerleaders of Moreno's and of the way he stacked the judiciary, the way he wanted it to be, to enable him to do all these things.
After the break, we'll be joined live by political analyst Isabel Díaz in order to discuss the Ecuadorian political situation in greater detail. Stay with us. Welcome back. In studio now, we have a political analyst, Isabel Díaz. Thank you so much for being here to discuss Ecuador a bit more with us. Let's start with what's going on right now. You were at the protest. I was also at the protest a little earlier. Police have been clearing people away from the center of Quito, where the large demonstrations were held, and also away from the National Assembly area. What did you see when you were last there?
Exactly that. I left there about 2 hours ago, and the strikers and the protesters were being met by brutal repression by the police and by the military. So it's really hard to believe that there are any dialogues being held if you face that kind of repression in the streets.
Absolutely, and there are a lot of different organizations that are on the ground there. I think, I'm not really sure if the international media is understanding how wide-ranging the groups are there. We have indigenous groups, and we've been hearing a lot more about that lately because they've been coming from out of town. We have some other smaller political groups, some political party-affiliated groups. Tell us a little bit about what the different interests are that these groups have.
Of course. Obviously, the main actor is the indigenous movement. However, since the very first day of the protest, you had many groups gathering in the streets. You had feminist movements, ecologists, students, obviously, they've played a major role, workers, obviously, but also people associated with the Citizens' Revolution and other forces. So I think you can say that what is happening is that somehow a popular bloc is forming in the streets. However, you cannot deny that the major actor is CONAIE.
Absolutely. And what has been the role of the Citizens' Revolution in this? Because, of course, they're one of the voices that we hear on the news, and they have a very large platform. And they're also in the city of Quito, in the city of Guayaquil, in major cities. So we hear a lot from these politicians, but it seems like now they're taking a back seat. What has been their role?
Yeah. I believe it's important to understand that the Citizens' Revolution has been denouncing the treaty with the IMF from the very beginning. They are actually the only political force that has seats in the National Assembly that has spoken up against the measures taken by the government. However, obviously, after CONAIE took the streets of Quito, they've taken a step back, I'd say, because as we all know, there's been some kind of a fight. Or the problem is that the president, he's constantly trying to endorse the whole unrest and the violence to Correa and the leaders of his movement. So they've responded. Today, Paola Pavón, which is the prefecta of Pichincha, she actually said that if there are any charges to be held against her, that she will come and respond for that. However, that hasn't happened yet.
Absolutely. And we've seen that there has been limited coverage internationally of what's been going on, or, the telling of only one side. Tell us about the coverage here in the media in Ecuador.
I think the alternative digital platforms have played a major role for keeping people informed, because as you know, the mass media here in Ecuador, at the national level, they've all backed the government, and they are not really telling us what's going on in the streets. Yesterday, for example, Pichincha Universal, which was a major radio station here, was shut down, and it was actually the only radio station that was transmitting live what was going on in the streets.
Wow, that's absolutely very serious. Another thing that the government is saying is that external forces have actually been behind these protests. I myself was on the ground. Participants are, of course, 100% Ecuadorian from different parts of the country, mostly from Pichincha, of course. What have you seen as far as the government attempting to place blame elsewhere?
Yeah, I think that's just the way they've found in order to keep, because what they've been saying all these days is that protests are just criminals, mafia, and so on, gangs They don't want to accept the fact that people, Ecuadorians from all over the country, are going out to the streets to protest for their rights. Actually, today, I believe, in the midday, the vice president came out and said that they had military intelligence saying that there were lots of foreigners taking part in the protest and causing violence, and that if any foreigners were to be found there, they will be deported, which I believe are really serious declarations, you know. And it also brings a wave of racism, xenophobia, that's really dangerous for Ecuador, which is normally a peaceful country, welcoming of foreigners.
Absolutely. And can you explain to us a little bit about the dialogue that the president is offering, and do you think anyone's going to take that offer?
I think it's really hard to believe in any kind of dialogue when you have a state of emergency that was declared only after 4 hours of protests, you know. That means military is controlling the streets right now. Many of our civil rights have been suspended. For example, we don't have a right to assembly right now. So long the government doesn't take the state of emergency back, it's really hard to believe that they are really willing to open up any dialogue. Also, they say they want to open up channels of dialogue with CONAIE, and at the same time they are saying they are not willing to bring back the full subsidies and reconsider any other of the reforms. So that's really worrying. We don't see any grounds for compromise there.
Absolutely. So we have a state of exception. This curfew is being strictly enforced right now. And, you know, like you said, the right of assembly, the right to demonstrate is questionable. What do you think is going to happen tomorrow?
We really don't know, because as you said, like, the government is trying to say now they are like talking with CONAIE, but 2 hours ago they were still trying to like take them out from the streets with lots of brutal repression by the police. So I believe unless the people that's responsible for the repression takes a step down from office, we cannot go back. They have to be held responsible for what they have done. We have, I believe, 6 people that are dead right now. That's something that Ecuador hasn't seen in years. I mean, I think we've experienced more than 3 presidents being taken out of office, and in all those times, only 1 person died, and now only after 1 week of protest, we have already 6 people dead.
An extraordinary series of events that's happening here. Thank you so much for being with us. Isabel Díaz, political analyst. You're welcome back anytime to explain more about what's going on in Ecuador. After the break, we'll look at the latest stories in the Caribbean. Stay with us. Welcome back to the Caribbean, where Jamaica's former education minister, Ruel Reid, and his wife, along with president of the Caribbean Maritime University, the CMU, Fritz Pinnock, have all been arrested. They were held in relation to a corruption probe regarding a multi-million-dollar fraud scheme at the Ministry of Education, CMU, and other government entities which fell under Reid's portfolio as minister. Around 5:30 a.m., police raided their homes in an operation conducted simultaneously in Kingston, St. Catherine, and St. Anne. Reid resigned from government on March 20th, while Pinnock was sent on special leave with immediate effect on Tuesday. Staying in the region, Antigua and Barbuda Prime Minister Gaston Brown says his country will invest $40 million in Liat, breaking a stalemate with Barbados over the purchase of the latter's shares in the cash-strapped airline. He made the comment during a radio program on Saturday.
I have indicated to her that the Antiguan and Barbudan government has $40 million that could be made available to recapitalize Liat, and that there should be a capital call, a fresh capital call, in which we will have the existing shareholders and possibly new shareholders recapitalize Liat. That will be followed with a restructuring of Liat to ensure that it becomes a little leaner, and to ensure that it can at least turn an operating profit going forward. So, we obviously will have further discussions, but the idea that we will purchase Barbados' shares, that is no longer on the table. We've taken the decision, instead of buying Barbados' shares, that we will invest directly in Liat, subject to the approval of the other shareholder governments.
The data collected from the house-to-house registration process in Guyana is expected to be fully encoded by the Elections Commission, GEOCOM, by next week, Tuesday. This as the country readies itself for general elections on March 2nd, 2020. GCOM has processed more than 2,000 new registrations over the past week. That the claims and objections process has been ongoing. Going forward, the Chief Elections Officer will prepare an opportunity for public scrutiny. Claims and objections will end on November 11th.
It is identified at the polling station.
A case of modern-day slavery was unearthed in Trinidad and Tobago as the police service rescued 69 citizens who were imprisoned at a church in Arauca, East Trinidad. The 65 men and 4 women, some of whom were handcuffed, shared bunk beds in tiny cages and received meals through a small opening. The police commissioner described the rescued people as slaves, adding that their relatives paid for their institutionalization. A total of 6 people have so far been arrested, including the pastor of the so-called Rehabilitation Center for Human Trafficking.
We have now cracked probably what is one of the biggest situations pertaining to human trafficking in this country. We have been liaising with the DPP. There have been 65 men and 4 women that we have found held against their will. They have been in prison. They've been in cages. Some of them have stated that they've been here for a few years. I have contacted the Minister of National Security, the Minister of Health. This is a much bigger picture, and we'll have to investigate each and every situation. 3 people have been held at this time, one being a pastor. He's being questioned. This is on Eastern Main Road in Arauca, and what we've seen is that this relates to virtual slavery, where persons have been in cages. We have reports from some of them that they have been tortured. It is a much bigger picture where there's profit made out of this, and where it involves family members deliberately sending their loved ones here and then trying to extract the profits from the family.
And we finish in Canada, where candidates are set to wind up campaigning ahead of the 2019 federal election on October 21st to elect members of the House of Commons to Parliament and a new Prime Minister. Our correspondent Pablo Vivanco gives us more.
Party leaders continue their campaigning ahead of the October 21st vote, and Justin Trudeau is in the north in Nunavut talking climate change. Conservative leader Andrew Scheer and NDP leader Jagmeet Singh both in the Greater Toronto area. Singh meeting with unions and students, Scheer in the suburbs around the city, hoping to pick up votes in those areas. Now, after Monday's debate, the Conservatives seem to be on track to win a minority government, according to the latest polls. According to those polls that came out after the debate, the Conservatives could be en route to win 152 seats compared to 117 for the Liberals and 36 for the Bloc Québécois. The NDP, for its part, is projecting to win up to 29 seats and 4 for the Greens. Tomorrow will be the last debate that will feature all leaders, and this will be in French.
We've come to the end of this news brief. You can find these and many other stories on our website at telesurenglish.net. And join us on social media, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. For TeleSUR English, I'm Camila Escalante. Thanks for watching.